Studio Ghibli just beat Disney at the Oscars for the Best Animated Feature, and it means way more than you think. See, The Boy and the Heron won in March and gave Miyazaki his second Academy Award, well deserved. In contrast, Disney has only won one Academy Award for Best Animated Feature in the last 7 years. A pretty significant dry spell compared to previous history. Studio Ghibli, over the past 40 years, has done something that Disney hasn't been able to do. Consistently deliver spectacular stories and animation. Consistently being the key word there. It seems
I just can't seem to set myself to watch all of Studio Ghibli's movies, because then I'm just sad that I watched all of them. I just want to keep it to one a year, so that I can be surprised every year about how good each of these movies are. And this year was The Boy and the Herald for me. 2 years ago I watched what was the movie, the big one, House Moving Castle. I watched that one for the first time. And I'm a big movie fan, but the more I look into these movies, they are just so spectacularly crafted. It's so weird to see, because there's no other company there are other companies, but there are just a handful of them that put so much detail into one storyline. That's amazing.
Seems like Studio Ghibli may have gained an edge on Disney, but how did they really do it? That's what we're going to talk about. And while you're here, by the way, give the video a like if you enjoy it. I'd appreciate it. So The Boy and the Heron is the first fully 2D animated movie to win Best Animated Feature since 2001, when it was awarded to none other than Spirited Away, another Ghibli film. Studio Ghibli has pretty much constantly stayed loyal to the 2D style. For the most part, the rest of the industry, though, has moved away from it, starting with Toy Story, and that...
I mean, the moment that they stopped, that Disney in itself stopped making 2D movies after The Princess and the Frog, that's just sad. The quality dropped so much in story-wise. I mean, they made a few good movies, but it did seem like almost all of the 2D movies, except for sequels and such, all of the 2D movies were great, except for the sequels. On the new ones, every story was just a banger. Just the stories that just stick with children till today, till probably in 100 years. That's... how can you just leave that? How can you just turn it around so much that stops working?
Continued into the 2000s and 2010s until the Spider-Verse, which marked a pretty significant shift in the type of animation that could be successful in the box office. And in the past few years, with
even Spider-Verse isn't really 2D. I mean, it is constantly made in 3D, and it draws from 2D, but it isn't 3D, it's just 2D. But it is an amazing movie, but it isn't 2D. And there are 2D movies that are great, but it's also not a lot of them that are made since The Princess and the Frog from Disney.
The advent of new types of animations, but also with the increasing popularity of anime, Western audiences have become more and more receptive to 2D animation, to the point that The Boy and the Heron has become the highest grossing Ghibli movie in the US and the third highest grossing anime movie ever. That's insane if you think about it. I briefly speak about this in my recent...
How much did it make then? Oh, wait a minute. The Boy and the Heron box office. How much did it make? Worldwide, 249 million. Damn. Just to compare, what did What did Spirited Away make? Spirited Away. Away box office. I mean, it made a lot more. It made 359 million. But that's over the span of 23 years. So you can't compare that really. I mean, that's almost 100 million, 200 million less. And The Boy and the Heron just have 20 more years to go to reach the same level.
Video about the state of animation, but there's a clear movement in the animated industry towards more diversity of styles, with a specific emphasis on the return of 2D. Not only with the win of The Boy and the Heron, but also with the nominees of the past few years. Movies like Robot Dreams, Nimona, Flea, Wolfwalkers, Puss in Boots, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, all movies that are either completely 2D or have significant 2D elements. And I'm not surprised, honestly. There's a warmth and authenticity to 2D that is beautifully unique, that connects us back to the hand-drawn traditional roots of animation. And the funny thing is that this is ridiculously ironic, because the animation studio that embraces 2D animation, the style, by the way, that most people consider only apt for childish cartoons, is the studio that embraces maturity more than...
That stigma is so out of date. I mean, I think the best stories are told because they're the best stories. Not because, I mean, this is obvious for people who watch movies, right? But there are so many people who have it in their heads that great stories can only be intriguing and can only be told if they are not in 2D, if they are live action. That's such BS. I mean, why is that? So many movies can be amazing even if they're in 2D, if they're just a story that's told but not in 2D or in 3D or even in live action. I mean, almost all of the anime that I've watched has great storytelling, almost all of them, and they are all animated movies or series even, and they tell a better story than, of course, a 1 hour live action movie that someone just liked because there are a few features or visual effects that intrigue them. Yeah.
Any other. For the longest time, animation was only considered suitable for fun cartoons and lighthearted movies. While Disney was happy to ride the cultural wave, adamant on associating animated movies with lightheartedness, talking...
In Japan, they just got it way earlier. They just knew that stories could be told. Great stories could also be told in 2D. They just knew that.
And funny repartee. Studio Ghibli, on the other hand, has been happy to veer away from that since the creation of the studio, showing audiences that cartoons could be serious, poignant, and thought-provoking stories. And this started way back in 1984 with the release of one of Hayao Miyazaki's first movies, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, a 2D animated movie that's set in a post-apocalyptic world, portraying a princess trying to protect her people and the environment from two warring nations. A pretty far cry from Disney's first movie, Snow White, and that was by design. Disney's movies were made to entertain and were more catered towards younger audiences. This shows as well in the simplicity and formulaic nature of some of its movies, where there's a clear good guy and bad guy, and the bad guy gets thwarted so that the good guy or girl can live happily ever after. Whereas if we look at...
I mean, still, they are the classic Disney movies. They can be really good. And some of them are, but some stories in 2D from Japanese grounds are just better. They hold more value. They explain characters way better. The characters are more realistic. Not that the realistic word realistic, I don't mean they are more. You could compare them more to real life, but some characters are just so much more realistically portrayed as a human being, or as an alien, or as an someone from a faraway land, or as an animal. That's They are so much more well written than just the good or the bad guy.
Some of Studio Ghibli's stories, there's much more nuance and complexity to the stories and characters. Ashitaka and San don't end up together, whereas in a Disney movie, they definitely would. Also, Lady Eboshi is clearly the bad guy in Princess Mononoke, right? But at the same time, she's shown to have a very kind and caring side, taking care of the lepers in the village and empowering the women to be strong and independent. My Neighbor Totoro doesn't have a villain and typical conflict resolution arc that we're used to, but rather meanders along without much overarching narrative purpose. Now, don't get me wrong, Disney was right to take the approach that
I mean, in My Neighbor Totoro, it's just that the guy wrote the story without a starting script. I That's what I got from it. He just started writing, and yeah, just like he said, the story just meanders on, and at a certain point it just resolves, and the kid gets found when he got missing or she got missing, with a simplistic end, and it doesn't even end badly. There's no particular love interest or something. It's just a simple story, and it's way better than almost any Disney movie, in my opinion. But many people can disagree with that.
it did. Western audiences at the time just weren't
I mean, not every story doesn't need to have a villain in order to be a good movie. I mean, every big AAA, well, that's more for games, right? So every big movie, big budget movie has some kind of villain, or an some type of protagonist that needs to do something throughout the movie. And in My Neighbor Totoro, that's just absent, and it's still a great story.
receptive
You just follow the life of someone living in that world.
to animated movies that were more serious in tone. Just to give you an example, The Prince of Egypt was produced by DreamWorks in 1998, a retelling of the life of Moses from being a prince to becoming a prophet. It's a pretty somber and serious tale, which was a big risk for DreamWorks at the time where Disney was coming out with Mulan and Hercules. And in its opening weekend, it was a huge flop. It's only over time that audiences started to appreciate the depth and amazingness of the Prince of Egypt. Disney made movies that they knew would sell to a Western audience. And it's funny because Studio Ghibli was even told outright that animation couldn't be mature. When Princess Mononoke was being released in the US in 1999, Walt Disney was the company that had the release rights. Sounds great, right?
That's also a problem, right? Because the moment the movie comes out, it needs to make big figures to make sure that it has a proper foot in the ground for the shareholders of Disney. So they know they will make money. But like The Prince of Egypt, if you manage to make a movie that you don't right away see is going to make a lot of money, then it's not interesting for shareholders, because they're not the target audience. They don't get the big figures, so those types of movies won't get made anymore, because that's not what they're interested in anymore.
Right? I mean, having one of the largest media companies on your side, huge win. Yet they weren't a big fan of Princess Mononoke's original cut. Producer Harvey Weinstein felt Princess Mononoke should be edited down for a Western audience. In America, they said animation was for families, and families might not want to sit through a 2-hour epic. Thankfully, Miyazaki's producer, Toshio Suzuki, was pretty clear in telling him absolutely no cuts. And thank God they did. They stuck to their...
I mean, even in 3D, there are so many stories that can be told extremely well. And even my parents are guilty of this, but most people just don't take a look at a 3D movie and say, this could be a great story for me, even though just because they always like watching or think only good stories can be told via live action, and they just have this bias towards it. I mean, take How to Train Your Dragon, for example. That is one amazing story told in 3D. So the type of genre should just doesn't matter. I mean, a great story can be told in a comic book or in any way. They can be told on forums. The SCP forums. I mean, many great stories are made around SCPs, which are community-made stories. That's so weird that is just a stigma that's hanging around.
Guns and stuck to the way that Studio Ghibli wanted to tell stories. For Studio Ghibli, animation was so much more than just for lightheartedness and fun little cute cartoons. And they showed that over the past 40 years. And tied to this maturity in animated storytelling is the topic of culture and film, a sensitive one at that. The soul of many Studio Ghibli movies are its magical creatures, which are very much rooted in Eastern culture. Spirits are everywhere in some of Miyazaki's movies, like in Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, or My Neighbor Totoro. While we might not think of Miyazaki's movies as religious or even spiritual, some of his most famous works are full of Shinto iconography. Now, it's important to note that Studio Ghibli's gods and spirits aren't explicitly based on any recognizable Japanese kami, but they're constantly present, and the relationship between humans and these spirits or gods remains critical to many of the stories. It's the way that these stories are so rooted in culture that gives them an extra layer of beauty and depth. People nowadays care more and more about films with cultural accuracy, and that said culture being represented with thought and care. In contrast, Disney has always struggled with its cultural representation. From the ridiculous decision to create a romantic relationship between Pocahontas and John Smith, the man that basically colonized her people historically, makes a lot of sense, to even smaller examples like simply using...
I mean, it could still happen, but it would be extremely unlikely that if someone came into your lands and just annihilated your entire land and killed all the people from your community, if they won't cooperate, and you just fall in love with a guy that's from those same lands, it would be extremely unlikely. But you could still write it into a coherent story if you do it good enough. But Disney can't. They couldn't.
Mushu as comic relief in Mulan, rather than giving him more weight in the story like that of the forest spirit in Princess Mononoke. People, of course, want stories that they can connect to, but they also want stories that are rooted in culture. In my eyes, Studio Ghibli has always had the upper hand in that department and continues to portray these elements with a lot of thought and care. And that brings us to the crux of this video. Why has Ghibli beat Disney at its own game? Well, Walt Disney once said, animation can explain whatever the mind of man can conceive. His motto was dream, believe, dare, do when he started Disney, but over the years that vision has gotten lost in the tapestry of the company. Disney has become first and foremost a company with a primary objective of selling as much as possible to as many people as possible. Look over the Pacific Ocean though and you'll realize Studio Ghibli is happy not releasing a movie for basically a decade, simply because from the beginning Ghibli films aimed for our perceptions, not our pockets. For 40 years, they have actually dared to dream way more than Disney. I would argue, only focusing on using animation as a way to tell incredible stories, and this most recent Oscar win not only gives credence to that, but also marks a pretty big shift in what audiences expect from animated films going forward.
I would hope so. It would make more sense. This guy thought this amazing. Here. For if anyone wants to like the video on their own, we will give it a like.